A company of my Void Marines and more shuttles with combat servitors escort the Astartes to the Corsair derelict, and via PIC transmissions we get an image of what's going on. Demons have infested the ship through that warp rift, and since these Eldar have cut themselves off from their infinity circuits, they now suffer eternal torment in the loving tentacles of their own warp god, Slange. That will teach them a lesson all right. Tech priests, extract to the superstructure and try to salvage anything of value. I advise my Mechonicus friends. It seems the wreck will not be salvageable, but perhaps some guns and sensors can be chopped away. The priests inside don't respond, so they're possibly a bit busy. The inbound shuttles do instead land at the hull, and the other priests and servitors begin slicing away at the Wraithbone armor to scoop out the precious loot. Did I mention how awesome Astartes are, especially in close quarters? With their sanctified power weapons, these lesser demons stand no chance, although the surviving Eldar are shooting at everyone on principle. It takes a few hours till the infestation is pacified, and the Scythes even capture 100 Eldar as prisoners. I'm pretty sure these Eldar will regret surrendering once the Magi of Forged Tigris get their tentacles on them. Not because the cult will deliberately torture them, but Xenos will not qualify for anesthetics during deep tissue examinations, so it amounts to the same thing. Soon enough, the raid is over, most of our early boarders are dead, and the Scythes return with Ibn Lorma, the leader of these corsairs, now slightly missing any limbs, and the rest of the prisoners. The external reclamation continues while I land on Tigris with my escort and loot. A whole battalion of Scutari takes charge of the corsairs, bounding them in metal cuffs and loading them into medical transports. Pretty sure they'll never be seen again. The Astartes squad returns with a dead brother, which is a bit sad. Sure, I expected to lose 10,000 servitors and maybe even some Void Marines, but well, Eldar are difficult opponents, amazingly fast and all psychers. Fabricators, perhaps you now agree that corvettes are useful. I wonder as the two priests welcome me together. A dismissive arm waves my words away. You have used a vortex warhead, Lord Pef. Luckily your pilot wasn't detected. Blank jeans are nice like that. I might even promote my daughter as captain of the litany soon. Some guys from Forge Riser gave me a battle cruiser, so I'll travel in style soon enough. I answer with a wide grin. The two Magi exchange a worried glance. Forge Riser is indeed rich. Did they ask for a wondrous STC template in return? I just shrug and shake my head. Nope. It was simply a gift. I suppose I will have to visit them one day and bring them my own gifts, but right now I intend to return to Estobon with a fleet. I say with a white lie. Still, it's technically truth, because I didn't give Riser any STC. No point trading with a lower-ranked priest when they don't have the right to promise me what I need. We have heard of their plight at Forge Estobon. Still, it worries us greatly, so many attacks on Forge worlds. Do you have to take everything? The Lady Margus asks me in a wary voice. I sigh, and taste more tea and cake. How many can you spare? I ask after a minute. They give me 400 corvettes, which is decent. So I take out the data slates and start the bit of barter we're all so familiar with. Of course, because we don't use thrones and other hard currencies, I can request fuel and munitions for free, as well as Gellerfield inhibitor consumables and replacement tech priests and servitors. A Forge world has billions of them, so they can spare a few thousands for a big deal, as incentive. Mentioning Riser and the battle cruiser has made them even more generous for some reason, and thus I received 10 Fellblade heavy tanks and 100 Lehman Russ tanks without any discord. Even extra lasguns and crack missiles for the PDF regiments are allowed without them blinking an eye, though I suppose bionic eyes don't blink. The weapons are loaded aboard the corvettes, for the simple reason I lack space right now. With 3,000 more chimeras on board the litany, the hangars become rather full and packed, but it's for the greater good. And I do get promised the new retribution pattern machines, sentinels and grav tanks included. Not the volcano-armed sentinels though. The Tigris pattern corvettes get crewed and filled by the Mechonicus for now, tech priests and a regiment of servitors and even a squad of armored Scutari as bridge guards. Forge Tigris has installed laser cannons in the turrets, which is not ideal, but I guess they were cheap. They still hit like a titan, so they'll work anyway. A dozen more STCs change hands, and I receive the pattern for a light power armor, like the Sisters of Battle have. Pretty sure I will have to change the chest piece anyway, because the boob plates may look cool, but are too distinctive. Or maybe I will keep them, should I meet some sisters and strike a good relation. Even the Sisters of Silence would be nice, since I have my Pharos device to talk with our minds. And they are blanks as well, which hints at some distinct advantages. Still smiling at that thought, I board my lander and return to the litany, while Wenchen has pushed the Eldar derelict into the sun while I was away. Leaving a corrupted wreck for the Mechonicus was like telling a kid not to open the jelly jar or play with fire. Good job, Wenchen. What do you think of Finona? I ask when reaching the ship bridge. She learns well and is smart. Good pilot too. He answers after a minute. Good enough. You will train her as a captain for the litany. Well, if we survive whatever chaos throws at us. I explain in a level voice. Behind me, the Astartes check their bolters by reflex. In a minute, Finona arrives on the bridge and sits beside me, where Rose used to. You like it? I asked my daughter with a smile. Yes, Captain. The machine spirit is eager to fight again. She answers after she links the implant to her command chair. Great. You have command then, with Wenchen as exo. Call me before we arrive at Estobon. I proclaim out loud, and see the bridge crew is rather stunned. The girl, well, she is 22 years old, so a young woman now, looks around then back at me a bit frightened. Really? I just shrug and walk away, Ludvia's smiling at her as encouragement. Before I leave, I hear her calling Henna, her mother, for help. Children, always a pleasure. I return to my rooms, and discharge my stress in bed for a few hours, because I do have plenty concubines traveling with me. New ones, but I don't mind. The nobles keep offering me pretty daughters for no reason, and I have a teenager body. Sometime later, Decima arrives with a cart of food and drinks, which we share with Ludvius. He does have some special organ that detects poisons and other threats, so he tastes everything first. Then I sit in my armchair with my wife in my lap, and keep working on new STCs, yet again reloading the cheap Imperial Guard templates and trying to make them better. Now I have more experience and knowledge, so I figure out how to attach a crack grenade launcher under a lasgun, which seems simple but it's really not. Not if you want the thing to be cheap but durable, easy to maintain and to fire. The range gets extended a bit more, and the battery is slightly better. Now, if only I could make a few trillion of them. The problem is not the weapons themselves. Humanity has plenty of better weapons. But they are not allowed to use them. Tradition and complacence, disregard for lives and even tactics, are norm in the military. Good officers might never get promoted, because they lack family relations, the Navy will not provide air cover, because they hate the Army, and so on. I save the new lasgun pattern and go to sleep. Reality is too depressing. And at the end of this trip, there will be a full-fledged chaos invasion that has been going on for years. I have prepared as best as I could, but I still fear it won't be enough. There is a kind of magic in logistics. There really is. Armies without water will simply die of thirst. Food and ammunition matter as well, and then there is fuel and spare parts and medical treatment. You may use trenches or tanks as shelter, but bunkers and shielded forts are better. And while the chaos did bring some supplies, they wouldn't last years and years. Plus the armies that invaded Estobon were very diverse, from traitor Astartes to corrupted humans and Xenos, mutants and psychers, demons and demonic engines of all sizes. That meant they wouldn't support each other, as every Chaos Lord, Sorcerer or War Master had conflicting agendas and would rather see a competitor fail and die. The fleet they had brought was still large and dangerous, but consumables were mostly depleted. And thus, my arrival hastened their defeat because I had supplies, and the traitors didn't. Estobon could still manufacture some equipment, especially for the Iron_Hands and their successor chapters, which had arrived first in defense of the Forged World. They also replaced as many limbs and organs with machines, as a tribute to Ferrus Manus, the Primarch with metal arms, which no doubt made them very dear to the Mechonicus and vice versa. With my ships, the Imperium side had 1,000 more corvettes, and a battle cruiser. That meant plenty shells and torpedoes had to be sent our way, and thus save the other ships. Rose and Victor have done whatever they could to prolong the siege, waiting for my eventual arrival. Almost instantly, my Vox box was flooded with 1,000 requests from everyone, friends, allies and enemies. I turned towards Finona to see her biting her nails in fear and frustration. "People are calling for you, Captain," I told her in an amused voice. "This is too big. And they're calling for you, not me," she exclaimed in anguish. I smiled and pointed at the new battle cruiser. "I'm just a passenger, for now. To try and get me close enough to board my own ship, if you can." A flight of demonized fighters turned towards our fleet, perhaps testing us. Corvettes, disperse into pattern gamma, full power to shields and point defense. Launch fighters for close support. And by the love of the Emperor, turn the sensors to autistic mode. I command rapidly, then leave the bridge. My Astartes formed around me as I walked briskly towards the lander's hangar, the one with Stormbirds. Because those boats had Gela generators, and that counted when the void was full of demons. By the time my assault boat was ready and prepared for launch, the Chaos Space fighters were blown up, since we had more corvettes than they had fighters in that wing. For once, I was the one with superior numbers on my side and it felt great. An hour later, the litany got close enough to the Overlord battlecruiser that personal transfer would be almost safe. Our escorts formed a sphere around to protect my tender body from any missile or fighter, and the Stormbird departed my old ship. Another ship was being prepared for my kids and concubines, but first I needed to see where to put them. In a minute, the lander entered the huge hangar of the battlecruiser where my son awaited. "Victor, you look well," I announced with surprise. He did indeed grow up, body matured and even his demeanor had become sterner and more composed. War changes everyone, but Victor seemed to have done well. He came to hug me and transfer the Overlord control to me, with a string of passwords and machine spirit protocols. "I have named the ship in your absence, Father. Now it's called Canticle for the Vanquished," he explained as I connected to the special data slate. "Good enough. What's a canticle?" I wonder in a soft whisper. Victor punched my shoulder and laughed, as if this was the best joke ever. Even a few Astartes chuckled in amusement. But I really wasn't certain. Some kind of prayer, most likely. I'll have to ask someone else. While I was a bit familiar with the cult of the Emperor and most known practices, I wasn't that involved. While other people prayed and hoped, I knew with certainty the realities of this hellish galaxy. Possibly more than any inquisitor. Furthermore, organized religion wasn't my favorite, here or elsewhere. "Go back to the bridge, Victor. I need to visit the ship and learn what it can do, before I figure out how to use it," I urged my blank son. "Canticle, Victor Lancefire retains exo prerogative." I continue, speaking in the Vox channel reserved for the captain. A faint response from the ship tells me it has heard me. We'll have to work on the communication issues, but I had time. A few tech priests from Rise arrive next to describe every deck and weapon capability, as well as engine limits and reactor output. They aren't the friendly and humane priests I'm used with, instead mingling machine code and binaric descriptors in their speech, as if unused at talking with people. They possibly aren't, I realize. Unlike high ranks which enter in contact with humanity regularly, these guys would just work with machines and code and electrical impulses, or what the Mechonicus calls the datasphere. "I hope all our Auspex sensors are set to autistic mode, right?" I asked to make sure. The tech priests freeze a second then confirm. All except the Vox communique and IFF telemetry with its TOB on. The Inquisitor has insisted, although there is no real need. We have engrams for defensive mazes and subversive infiltration. I see. Scrap code defenses too? Forge Riser must be quite secure then. I muse out loud and watch the priests wave their mechadendrites in near panic. There, I scared them into being cautious from now on. Perhaps Tyranids wouldn't use complex data viruses, but pretty much everyone else would. And these coded protections would never be failsafe, not in an universe with magic and sorcerers and demon engines. The visit continues on the upper decks, where my apartments are 10 times larger and I even have a jacuzzi. I bet Victor had that installed, since I did have one back on Alivar. There are chapels and cathedrals, both for Omnissiah and the Emperor, barracks and tank armories. Not many troops, since most of them must be fighting on Astobon. Plenty wounded and servitors, the Medicae hospital filled with burned and mangled grenadiers and stormtroopers. And here I meet some Adepta_Sororitas for the first time. The first woman to meet me was a Hospitaller advance from the rank of the Sisters of the Ordosh Hospitaller, who serve as physicians and offer care in the Imperium's war zones. Such as Istobon, for example. "Who are you? Who let you in here?" the sister demands loudly, an angry hand patting her hip, where she carried a laser pistol. I step aside to let Ludvius deal with the loud woman, and I go to examine one of the wounded. The canticle provides his name and origin, then the medical prognosis. Crippled for life, if he survives the next week. Third-degree burns didn't heal so easy. The rows of beds go for hundreds of meters, and they are stacked high too. Damn hellish galaxy. I check a few more, but everyone I see has a chance to survive. Then again, triage is quite brutal in the regiments. A corpsman or nurse checks the injury, and sends the wounded to hospital or grave, on the spot. Then I turn and leave, running scenarios in my mind. Perhaps a biokinetic psyker? Some kind of regeneration serum? A saint with healing aura? Not very likely. Then my eyes fall on the Scythe Astartes. That place is the most fertile recruiting ground I have ever seen. Trained soldiers with mortal wounds for bravery. How come there aren't 100 chapters implanting them? I ask in an innocent voice. The Astartes captain blinks confused and turns towards his brothers. They stare at me like I had grown a few more heads. Some injuries will not heal, even after the genocide. But, the Iron Hands don't mind missing limbs. He muses to himself and glances at Ludvius for support. Lord Pef is always right, brother. But when he isn't, it's always fun to watch. The veteran Astartes proclaims in a confident tone. I just sigh and head for the bridge. That isn't what the word always means. Anyway, I need to call a few Iron Hands to visit me. It's time to end the carnage now. I find Rose and her Death Watch installed comfortably on the bridge, her retinue a bit larger and even includes a tech priest and another guy with red hair and huge muscles. Not a Marine, but obviously very strong. We meet again, Lady Inquisitor. And retinue. I announce while waving my fingers at Justine. She replies shyly. Captain. I stop myself from sighing, as it's not the place. New officers and crew and all that. Then I pat Victor's shoulder and yank him from the captain chair. Go rest, Victor. I am here. He nods with glowing eyes and hurries away, hopefully to sleep. Then I lean into the seat and delve in my new machine spirit, to figure out how to end this siege, without too many losers. Won't be easy, I know. I open the system map and examine all the potential weak points among the Chaos warbands and fleets. Then I begin simply marking them for the canticle, by priority and difficulty. Isolated units with no capital ships, minor fleets with a cruiser or two, isolated battleships, and then a few bigger problems. On the ground, there was a whole other mess, because psychers and demons made augury scans very unreliable. But again, I try to do the same, marking down isolated bands and separated traitor regiments, then armor groups and bigger demon engines converted from heavy tanks, knights or titans. Estobon, this is Pef Lancefire. I'm in position to help. Permission to do so? I sent via the Vox channel provided for the canticle. Praise the Omnissiah. Please, Lord Lancefire, do anything to stop these traitors and heretics. A familiar voice replied after a minute. The fabricator himself. Things must be really bad down there. Well, this was going to hurt. Lancefire ships, form up in pattern Delta. I will relay vectors for group deployment. I command out loud on the clan's Vox channel, while the implant burns at full power to keep up with a myriad of orders and direction shifts. Like a school of fish, the corvettes assemble into a triangular formation with the canticle in the front, while the litany is sent in close orbit with Estobon with different orders, like orbital support and landing our armor and gunships. The destroyers escort the corvettes' shuttles filled with weapons for the PDF regiments, and they keep doing this for a week. Quite a few weapons to deliver, for 250,000 soldiers. My fleet is very fast now, because corvettes have a small mass and are easy to accelerate, and the Overlord is fast by design. I aim the fleet to intersect a lone Chaos battleship, and just wait for the fools to react. A few different destroyers and frigates speed up to intercept, and even a cruiser with its own escort feels brave. An hour later, the Chaos finds out why the Overlord class is so wanted by nearly every captain. Our torpedo salvo minces the fragile cruiser and a frigate, while the corvette's main batteries focus fire and obliterate a dozen destroyers with impunity. About 30 corvettes get damaged or their void shields fail, and thus I replace them with the second wave behind. Then I turn the fleet away and send a wing of fighters toward that huge Chaos battleship, which had turned to receive my fleet with a full broadside. But I never intended to massacre my own ships. Teresa, my other blanked pilot, is speeding towards the battleship, among 30 other space fighters. The enemy launches its own demon fighters for cover, but it won't help. As the fighters begin to duel and unleash hunter-killer missiles, Teresa fires her own payload, and runs away like she was trained. A minute later, the warp rift hits the battleship straight above the reactor, and shields, armor or psychosigils are powerless to stop a micron-wide tear through the fabric of reality. The containment is ruptured and the reactor explodes in a huge ball of plasma, blood and corrupted flesh. Of course, this battleship is a dozen kilometers long and very sturdy, so it doesn't break up into pieces or something, not from a tiny warp vortex. A section about 1 kilometer long is gone and flames engulf the ship, but without a reactor, the battleship cannot change course or even slow down. Farewell, on your long and slow voyage towards the edge of the galaxy and beyond. The battleship is overrun with demons anyway, so it would be impossible to board and capture it. A counter ticks down on the Canticle's machine spirit. 98 vortex missiles remaining, 7 vortex torpedoes, 6 incinerator torpedoes, 1 cyclonic torpedo. I turn and raise an eyebrow at my Rose, who smiles at me sweetly. So you found my surprise. I didn't know if you'd return in time, so I had to make sure the enemy will not win. Teleport attempt detected. Failsafe engaged, teleport diverted into our plasma wake. The tech priest on the bridge reports in a smug voice. I glance up at the holoscreen to see a dozen things with spiked power armors melt into the fiery exhaust of our plasma engines. That was a nice trick, Riser Priest. Perhaps they were useful after all. Good job, Margus. Do update all my clan ships with this protocol. I tell him with a wide grin. My Astartes escorts seem a bit deflated because they didn't get to fight anything. The Margus wrings a few tentacles in concern. Such procedure needs 1,000 hours of machine canticles, holy ointments and recitations, Captain. It cannot be done over Vox transmissions. I frown a little, but such is the way of the Mechonicus. Slow, tedious work and too many prayers. The litany as fast as possible and then the destroyers. I answer after a few seconds. He nods and accepts my orders, which is a good start. Chaos borders would ruin my ships even faster than lasers or torpedoes. Then I turn back my full focus on the next target and the next. The trick keeps working, and by the third day we have cleared 1/10 of the Chaos ships by ourselves. Running out of isolated morons though. The remaining Chaos fleets are mostly engaged with Estobon's immense orbital forts and the defense fleet, but they seem focused on winning the ground war, for some reason. It seems against logic to me, because controlling the orbitals is the most important part of any space war, but whatever. I did my job and didn't lose any ships yet. Even on the ground, the newly deployed Fellblades and Lehman Russ tanks are making a dent into the Chaos forces, and Finona has focused down 3 Chaos Titans already and massacred a dozen traitor regiments with the Litany's Lance batteries. Our gunships and chimeras are deployed to support the PDF regiments while they rearm and get trained how to fire the las guns, but it's not yet time for an offensive. I go to sleep for a few hours, because my flesh may be young again but I still get tired. Then a Rose and her Rosette wake me up, and the Inquisitor seems rather worried. Pef, wake up. I blink myself awake and hold my hand out. Ludvius fills it with a cup of CF, and everything is better in a minute. What happened now? I blurt between gulps of miraculous healing. I sensed someone, a Primarch. She reveals with a hidden glance at my Astartes friend, who had gone deathly still. I hum deep in thought, going over possible candidates. Iron Hands Astartes are here. And they have a vendetta with Fulgrim. The Serpent. Ludvius mutters as his good eye starts turning red. Watch those emotions, big guy. I know you hate the traitor, but don't splatter me by accident. I sigh audibly and close my eyes to think, the savant implant running at full strength. A demon prince wasn't something that mortal weapons could harm. Even if I could target him from orbit, he would just respawn. That thing is not Fulgrim. Only a demon with his partial memories. But we don't have a pariah to break his powers. And Justine would evaporate before she could restrain the thing. I answer with a dismissive wave. Ludvius and Rose focus on me like laser pointers. Is that true? They both ask in a hopeful voice. Some Necron lord has Fulgrim in stasis. Trazin or something like that. We'll go get him back, one day. Just need to find something worthy to trade. I explain and stare into my empty cup. I really didn't have anything that could kill a demon prince. Except. Why are you staring at me like that? Ludvius asks and draws back. What can the Blood Angel do, Pef? My Rose wonders with a curious voice. Glad you asked, my dear Inquisitor. We will bombard and isolate the serpent from his followers, while Ludvius calls his boss for help. And when Sanguinius arrives, Justine can get close and weaken the beast a little. It's a long shot, but it should work. I proclaim in a confident voice. The Inquisitor blinks in surprise, then holds out her rosette. Sealed by my order, Astartes. What we're about to try is not quite canonical. The powerful engram in the rosette burns in the warp, and Ludvius starts bleeding from both eyes, human and bionic. I understand, Inquisitor. And I do trust Lord Pef. Let's hope we will see another miracle today. Well, that revelation didn't end in blood and tears, even if it technically did. Thus, we soon arrive in the Canticle's vault, where the stasis box with the sounding board rests now. This is an empathic amplifier, my friend. Kneel and pray, and ask Sanguinius to help. Tell him about Istobon and Fulgrim. I explain while Rose turns off the blue temporal barrier. The Emperor protects. The crying Astartes shouts in devotion. And have him heal the burned soldiers as well, if he feels like it. I add in a half-joking voice. Pretty sure such a feat is really easy for the Sanguina, but mortals aren't usually of notice to such entities. Ludvius just nods and keeps muttering his prayers. Meanwhile, the Canticle and our escorts speed towards Istobon's orbit, firing all batteries as we pass through the Chaos blockade. Here, I lose 11 corvettes because we couldn't avoid all the incoming fire in our rush to get in position. Luckily, I can coordinate with Finona via the ancient console, and we start a barrage to separate the Serpent from his closest allies. 6 more corvettes are lost to ground fire, because Titans can fire into orbit, but we manage to create a perimeter devoid of Chaos followers. Then we keep pounding the Demon Prince with our medium batteries to keep him still, as the ground melts and burns around him. Magma and laser cannon fire don't seem to bother Fulgrim much, but it does slow him down. And then, a golden glow forms around the Canticle, because Ludvius has indeed been heard. A beam of light descends and an angel appears, with golden wings and even a sword. In a blink, the Sanguina teleports on the surface and begins to battle the Serpent with mountain-shattering blows. I wish they had popcorn in the future. It made a glorious sight anyway. The Serpent kept bleeding a silvery metal instead of blood, and the psychic apparition didn't bleed at all, instead losing pieces of itself, then regenerating them in a golden glow. Still, that two-handed sword had to be at least a force weapon, as every single strike hit and did damage. The Demon Prince struck back furiously, teeth and claw matching the angel blow by blow. Meanwhile, the litany kept firing in a wide circle around the fiery arena, while our corvettes bombarded nearly every single Chaos base to keep them pinned. But suppression couldn't last long, as the Chaos fleet decided to attack and rescue the traitor Primarch. Scythes of the Emperor, can I depend on you to escort my mother and support the angel against the Serpent? I asked while turning towards Captain Thracius and his squad. They didn't hesitate for a second, and nodded politely towards Justine. Of course, Captain Pef. It would be our honor and our duty. For the Emperor. The captain proclaimed in a certain voice. I was afraid this might mean their deaths, but such is the fate of all Astartes. Not one of them has died of old age. My mother had equipped a light power armor and a Rosarius, which should keep her safe for a few seconds. Follow me, Astartes. This ship has a teleportarium, and there is no silence here to stop me. The Inquisitor commanded and marched out with her retinue. I held my thumb up for success and concentrated back on my own mission, keeping the orbitals secure. Torpedoes and lances pounded the advancing Chaos fleet, and my corvettes were sent to dart in and around the big ships, to try and deliver a surprise torpedo into their engines. Our space fighters flew wildly, dueling other demon fighters and intercepting bombers and torpedoes, while the missile launchers emptied their magazines, firing crack missiles as fast as possible. Then the Chaos heavy ships closed in, and our void shields began straining under enemy fire. A purple flash, and then another, and 2 Chaos battleships burst into flames and demons as they encountered my own vortex torpedoes. Of course, even more demons rushed in, somehow managing to swim through the void towards us. The point defense flak cannons and the multi-lasers fired non-stop, bursting the demons into shreds of ectoplasm and fire. I urged the Canticle to steer away and hide behind a huge Arc Mechonicus warship, using this time to recharge the shields and reload missiles and torpedoes. The corvettes did great, especially against demon fighters and chaos destroyers, since their own guns fired faster and more accurately due to being new and well maintained. I tallied about 200 Chaos escorts destroyed by my meager fleet, and a dozen critical hits on enemy capital ships that had their void shields down. The Canticle itself did much better, with about 50 kills to our name, and even 3 battleships damaged with vortex warheads. Considering the time and effort it took to build such large monsters, it was quite a score for us. We lost 200 corvettes ourselves, which wasn't that good, but such is war. Especially in tight close combat, losses begin to grow fast. All ships, disengage and regroup at the moon, Fleet Pattern Alpha, I commanded as another corvette blew up from a single heavy cruiser salvo. The Canticle's spirit marked the guilty Chaos cruiser for retaliation and I approved. Our salvo of torpedoes blew that cruiser apart, and even a destroyer escorting it took some damage from the huge explosion. The lance batteries tracked the wounded prey and finished it off in a single pulse. Damn, I loved my ship now. Again, we fled and began rearming the torpedo tubes, went down on Estobon an immense psycho scream erupted. Talk to me, Brother Ledvius, I demanded without turning, my attention focused on the fleet battle. Lady Justine made contact. It seems that Demon got scared and tried to run. He explained while I blew up a Chaos frigate and the Hunter-Killer launchers brought down a sneaky bomber that got too close. The Canticle shook tremendously, and the void shield failed. And backup iron shield sprang back into place almost instantly. Teleport detected, lower decks. Combat servitors deploying to intercept. The tech priest announced in a metallic voice. Damnation. Most of my Astartes were down on the ground, as were most of my troops. Estimate numbers and composition. I asked with trepidation, while the Canticle fled the battle before something important was sabotaged, and we were left defenseless. The Magus screeched something in Binharic, then resumed in Gothic. Estimation complete. We detect 6 traitor Astartes and 1 unidentified male. Presumed armed and dangerous. Captain, you should evacuate to the Litany, Ledvius demanded in a stern voice. Ah. The Astartes was right, of course. We'd need at least 6,000 troops to match 6 power-armored traitor marines, and they had a sorcerer as well. Not that these boarders would stand and take fire from 6,000 guardsmen, instead hunting us all with lightning strikes and perhaps surprise teleports. Still, that would leave my ship, and all those wounded at the traitor's mercy. Not on my watch. Victor, take the bridge. Magus, gather some servitors. We're going hunting, I commanded with fake bravery. Damn it all to hell. I tried to avoid getting into fights with the ugly things. In a minute, I had 100 servitors, 2 squads of void marines and my bodyguard Astartes prepared, checking our weapons, las guns and crack grenades, then melter guns and the power weapons. I kinda doubted my chances in melee with an Astartes, especially some damned millennia-old veteran with a kill count over 1 million. Then we rushed towards the latest sighting of the traitors, and caught one of them butchering some serfs while laughing madly. Corn worshipper possibly. My first shot hit his face straight on, but it barely singed his hardened skin, then a blur pushed me away as it sped and struck the traitor with his power maul. The Chaos Space Marine simply broke in two, head exploding into gore and blood, then his chest. Containment and eject the remains into the sun, I demanded while poking the Rhizomagus on his shoulder. Or maybe his hip, hard to tell with the transhuman cyborgs. A few servitors stayed behind to complete my order, and we ran towards the next enemy sighting. I vectored their path on my implant. The Medicae ward, of course. Send servitors to protect the wounded. If any are able to shoot, give them weapons. I spoke on the Vox speed, among deep breaths. Commanding from the front was exhausting, and my Canticle battlecruiser was really big. Lots of running to do. Then we reached a deck elevator and I managed to calm my breath, and observed Ludvius. The Marine seemed barely excited, as if this was only routine or training for him. I mean, he probably saw more combat missions than I saw STC templates, so it made sense a little. Wear your helmet, Astartes, I demanded as I remembered mine and drew it on. I rather not get punched in the face again. He listened to me, for some reason, and it was just in time. The elevator doors opened suddenly, and we entered a hail of bolter fire and shrapnel from grenades and exploding machinery. I fell on my belly on reflex and started firing my Hell pistol at any big face I could find. Since Space Marines are so big, their wide faces make a decent target, with their eyes as the bullseye. About a dozen shots later, I did score a full hit, and I saw the traitor's eye burst and explode into purulent green goo. Nergulite traitor, most likely. No wonder they headed for the medical ward. I kept firing, while around myself the servitors and void marines began exploding into chunks of metal and blood. Ludvius stood in front of me and fired his bolter in loud staccato bursts, then a bluish melter blob from the barrel underneath. Another traitor Astartes died, his armor failing him and the melter round burning his organs like creme flambée. Then from the side, a woman's voice started singing and chanting, and a dozen sisters arrived leading a few hundred walking wounded. I'm not sure how they kept breathing and shooting while also running and chanting, but perhaps they had special training. My own breath was painful and getting difficult, and I was lying down and shooting a recoilless weapon, not a bolter. Then again, logic wasn't the strongest suit of this universe. A traitor marine growled something and punched a sister straight through her belly, but the woman keeps singing and shooting the ugly face from point-blank range, till both of them fell to the deck, dead. Another sister grabbed an Astartes and flung him over the shoulder, then aided by two other women cracked the traitor's head open, and then incinerated the brains. The guardsmen fired their own weapons in support, without doing too much damage, but it helped. The nearest traitor Astartes turned to return fire, and Ludvius pounced, striking his back with the power maul and then crushing the head under his armored boot. Did I mention this galaxy as a bit brutal? Oh, yes. Almost immediately, my friend was lifted up in the air by some unseen force, his arms forced back, leaving him exposed. So I sprang from my safe-ish position and rushed out, firing my pistol at the pink-wearing sorcerer. It did nothing, of course. The Psyker had a force field around him and simply lifted his other hand towards me. Sucker. His face scowled in bewilderment, then fear as I got closer and closer, and his warp powers had no effect. Then I slipped on some blood and slid on my back towards him, luckily avoiding a burst of bolter rounds from the last traitor Astartes. My left hand grabbed my power dagger and I sliced the Chaos Psyker's leg as I passed under him, and jumped towards the bigger threat. But here, my luck ran out. The Space Marine simply caught my wrist and broke it like a twig, and ignored my reflex kick to the balls. Damn it. These guys didn't have balls anymore. Funny guy, aren't you? The Chaos Astartes chuckled in a baritone voice. A thin scream behind me announced Ludvius had arrived and terminated the wounded sorcerer. Purge the unclean, he bellowed in a loud shout. His barrage of bolter rounds struck the traitor, only to be deflected by some type of shield. But then another melter blast crashed that shield and I fell to the deck as the traitor drew his own weapon to parry Ludvius's maul. I rolled away and kept shooting with my good hand, which possibly only annoyed the humorous traitor. Then, as the two Astartes were locked in a contest of strength, a metallic tentacle flashed by and scooped out the traitor's brain in a single second. Interesting. I've never seen such bionic implants before. the Magus commented while examining the still-living brain with fascination. I nicknamed this tech priest the Juggler, for his skill with scalpels, as he had the habit of spinning a dozen scalpels in midair before a surgery. Juggler lowered the pulsating brain towards me, so I could see it for myself. The brain looked rather normal to me, though why would anyone make black metal wires as a brain implant? Perhaps emulating his Primarch, Angron? Ouch. Perhaps those are slave controls, I muttered as my wrist started acting up, no doubt due to the exposed bones sticking out. A battle sister came to check me out and give me a medical prognosis. I fear you will never use that hand again. Pray to the Emperor, for healing and for salvation. I sighed inward and fell on my back, trying to rest. Why was everything so bright? I admit, I was never interested in prayer, mostly because in my first life it wouldn't do anything, and here it would also do jack. Blanks were immune to the warp, so even if some godling wanted to listen I would be exempt. But glancing at my mangled wrist, I took a leap of faith and decided to listen to the nice sister. Hey Emperor, Pef here. Send a minion and fix my hand, will you? I promise I'll return the favor. I mumbled in my head, while wishing someone would turn off the damn blinding light. A golden hand lifted me up in the air, and the pain vanished. So I opened my mouth to say thanks, only to stare at the same angel from before, now looking rather frayed and full of holes. Must have been a tough fight down there. His other hand held my wrist in confusion, possibly wondering why the healing wouldn't work. Of course, as a warp construct, the Sanguiner was just as powerless as the sorcerer from before. Immune meant immune. His head turned towards Ludvius. I blank and empty, but he could use some kind of mind link to speak to the Blood Angel anyway. My Astartes friend rushed to obey, slicing open his palm and offering a blood tribute. Then that blood swirled and glowed with energy in midair, before falling on my left hand like a golden mist. And then it hurt, for a second. I must have fainted, because I woke up in a hospital bed, with the sister from before holding my hand in her own hands, and murmuring a lullaby of some kind, involving murdering heretics and burning mutants alive. Very comforting, for someone who was both of those. Hello, sister. Did the angel listen, after all? I asked, curious, and retract my hand to examine it. Although it looks intact now, it also feels foreign and strange. Stronger too, I know that for certain. Must be the glowing veins under the skin. What do you mean, Captain? She answers with a frown. The wounded ward. I explain politely. She forms the sign of Aquila with her fingers and nods. Yes, Lord Pef. All the burned guardsmen have been healed. The ones with mangled limbs were only stabilized and the bleeding stopped by miracle. Your tech priests told us that bionic limbs will be provided freely to every one of them, as a sign of respect for the angel's deed. I nod and sigh inward. So even the Sanguiner had limits. Or perhaps he was too tired. Then I lean on the pillow and focus inward, checking the remembrancer implant for a more accurate recall of those events. However, the angel itself doesn't appear in the recordings. Was a mere mind alteration? I'll have to check Canticle's logs and find out. Do I still need bed rest? I wonder out loud. I feel rather great right now. Well, our Curia Advance wants to examine you before you are released. I believe she wants to record your testimony and take samples from the miracle hand. The woman pleaded in a wary voice. Ludvius snorts from the side of my bed, seeming amused. Let's not do that, Captain Pef. You have enough women after you. It seems funny, but the Sisters of Battle number in the millions. I'd rather not have them following me around like a saint or something. Thus, I stand up and look around for my clothes, only to find them missing. Classic hospital tactics, but this is my ship. I wrap the bed sheets around me like a toga and walk away, ignoring the outraged look on the sister's face. Soon enough, I enter my apartments and embrace my family, who seemed quite relieved to see me. They all check my balls again, for signs of metallic transmutation. What were you thinking, my dear husband? Decima chides me and clenched her fist rather painfully. I kiss her cheek and nod inward. That stunt was rather foolish. I mean, if there was only the sorcerer it would have worked superbly. That brainless Astartes was way too fast and strong for me. Lord Pef kicked the traitor in the balls, Lady Decima. Fortunately, that saved his life, because that world_Rita was too shocked at our Lord balls. Ludvius explains with an encouraging thumb up. But Astartes don't have balls, right? My wife asks in confusion. The veteran Astartes just chuckles and sits on his plasteel chair, his bolter casually pointed at the apartment store. My Rose and a single Death Watch enter, and the Inquisitor runs to check my body for damage, tearing away the modesty sheet. Lucky bastard. She murmurs as she hugs me tight. Her own armor is cold and smells of death, but I ignore that. Decima, please wait outside. I ask in a mild voice. Rose doesn't wait long to undress and start riding me as fast as she can, releasing tension and making both of us a bit happier. Sometime later, she draws my chin towards her. We both lost much and it won't get better, my love. Only the captain survived from those scythe guards, and only him from my retinue. She explained, pointing her finger towards the door where her own black-armored Astartes stood guard. I feel my heart skip a beat. Everyone? I ask in a whisper. However, their sacrifice was not in vain. The serpent is dead and the tech priests have melted the corpse into a vat of boiling adamantium. I aided them with purity seals and so did a few sisters from the Adepta Sororitas. The demon prince should be contained now. She adds in a grave voice. I curse out loud and stand up. Justine, my mother? I shout in anger. She just shakes her head. Damn it. I knew her job was dangerous, but she had escorts and that force field. Fleet situation? I ask as I swallow my pain for later. Total naval loses, about 25%. On the ground, it's 45% loses. Used to be more, but about 5% have recovered and are returning to the regiments. Nearly 10% injured guardsmen await bionic limb and organ replacements. Rose says in a dispassionate tone. Good enough, some might say. I mean, it's the worst campaign on my record, but even so it makes me look like a genius compared to the army's glory hounds or suicidal admirals. My guts yearn for revenge though. In a minute, I find a backup uniform and head towards the bridge. While I was resting, the fleet has resupplied and rearmed the consumables, the shields have been restored and the fighter pilots got to rest as well. Victor pats my shoulder for comfort as I sit in the captain chair. Avenge her, Dad. He whispers in a grieving voice. Don't worry, son. I check with the Canticle's machine spirit for an update on the system's map, and begin setting new targets. There are 3 Chaos battleships left, and 11 battlecruisers. I still have 3 Vortex torpedoes and 23 Vortex missiles. More than enough. Once the heavy ships are gone, Estobon and its allies will have a field day with the remaining traitors. Form up, Lance-fire ships. Pattern Delta, and don't be frugal with munitions. Let's send these bastards back to hell. I proclaim on our fleet-wide Vox channel. In an hour, the special munitions are prepared, and 30 corvettes in bad shape are diverted towards Estobon. It's true that warp-capable ships cannot land or even maintain bombardment altitude for more than a minute. But corvettes are also cheap and expendable. We depart from our hidden position behind the moon and accelerate, our vector taking us towards the right flank of the Chaos Fleet, and slightly below their orbital plane, just enough to avoid the firing arcs of their main batteries. Instead, all our batteries can fire without obstruction, in a similar method once used by German fighters attacking bomber formations. It is total surprise for the enemy, as they maintained a battle line to confront the defenders and their orbital forts. One by one, Chaos escorts and cruisers blow up under concentrated barrages of torpedoes, lance batteries or macro cannons. Then a Chaos battlecruiser starts turning its broadside towards us, a bit too late. A Vortex missile detonates its warhead just under the ship's engine, shearing them off and exposing its unarmored backside to the Mechonicus fleet and the Astartes barges. 1,000 lances strike the warprift and the battlecruiser and boom it goes. My fleet passes under and keeps firing, forcing more and more Chaos ships to turn and engage us. But one of 5 traitor ships cannot keep up with hundreds of corvettes and my other ships. Like a forest fire, we scour and purge the heretics with our thrice-blessed weapons, till we encounter another battlecruiser which we also slice in two with a Vortex missile. These warprift weapons are truly fantastic, though much too rare to be used often. I heard the Mechonicus somehow siphons the warp energy from dying stars to make these expensive weapons. We lose some space fighters, but we keep going. Another battle cruiser blows up, and we reach the big uglies, the 3 battleships that hold the center, and 9 battle cruisers escorting them. Well, 8 such ships now. The Chaos battleships are not exactly maneuverable, and cannot stop the vortex torpedoes that I fire before I turn our fleet away and start accelerating. Back on the ground, 30 hardened positions with void shield deflectors and Chaos Titans get a surprise orbital drop, each receiving a warm salute from our plunging corvettes. They could have lasted years of bombardment from a corvette's meager weapons, but mass is mass. The void shields are powerless to stop our sacrificial ships and pop like balloons. In a meteor-like impacts, those 30 traitor armor regiments including the Titans are vaporized in cataclysmic explosions, just as in orbit 3 battleships suffer a catastrophic reality check with my vortex torpedoes. Estobon, my fleet will be rearming and coming about for another run. I explain politely as the defense fleet struggles to contain the warp rifts and close them, before all the immaterium arrives at the party.
I think you did enough, Lord Pef. Leave us something to do, and not involving vortex warheads.
The Fabricator General answers in a slightly horrified voice.
Okay then. No more nice warheads. At least not today.